So Paul Krugman has a new editorial that has enraged me. It's called Sanders Over the Edge. I think actually Krugman might be over the edge. So let me explain. First, he starts out with the usual condescension to Bernie supporters, calling them Bernie bros, and saying that they don't understand policy, which is hilarious given that I'm going to explain to you how wrong Krugman is on policy in just a second. After attacking millions of Democratic voters, he then goes on to say that Bernie might have now become a Bernie bro. Like, this whole smear was about how somehow Bernie supporters were sexist in the first place. Now, I don't know how that's coming into play here based on the New York Daily News article where Krugman claims that Bernie doesn't know enough about the banks. Again, hilarious given how little Krugman apparently knows. But what does that have to do with Bernie bro? I guess he's saying, oh, he's so clueless. I'm so smart. Yeah, we'll find out if that's the case. So first he says, he's got this easy slogan, break up the big banks. But it doesn't work that way, Bernie. That's interesting because Tom Hartman was a great talk show host, pointed me to an op-ed in the New York Times written by Paul Krugman, back in 2009 that said, banking on the brink, where he said we should nationalize the banks. Now, those are two different things, breaking them up and nationalizing them, but at the same time, both are considered extreme measures like, oh my God, what are you going to nationalize the banks? What are we, communists? No, as I explained back then and Krugman explained back then, no, oftentimes you have to nationalize banks, take them over, and then put them back in the private market in order to stabilize things. And yes, sometimes you have to break up different industries because they've gotten monopoly power, and then you put them back in the market. It is a similar concept in that way, and it's not extreme, and it's something that we have done in different industries throughout American history. For him to paint it that way shows me that he apparently doesn't know much about economics or U.S. history, but we're at the tip of the iceberg of his preposterous claims. Then he goes on to say, the real problem in the economic crash was not the big banks. No, you didn't just say that. Well, I'll give you a quote. Quote, the crisis itself was centered not on big banks. Wrong again, Paul. Yeah, it was. There's no question it was. He says, no, it was like Countrywide Financial. They are the ones who wrote the bad mortgages, and the mortgages were the problem. No, that's half the problem. Yes, that's true. The mortgages were the trigger and the gun, and Countrywide had a lot of bad mortgages, and they had the underlying issue in the first place. But, and this is a giant but, the reason that the crash was the size it was because a lot of those banks created derivatives where they gambled on those underlying mortgages. So if it was just the mortgages, we would have had a tremendous problem, but we wouldn't have had a world-changing problem like we did. It's that the banks created these instruments, these toxic instruments, where they bet on those mortgages. And the people who did that were the big banks. Boy, if you don't understand that, I question you not only being a writer for the New York Times, but being a professor at Princeton. Really, Krugman, you don't understand that concept? See, the only thing that might be worse than him not understanding it is him writing this nonsense now in order to protect Hillary Clinton. Why? Because Hillary Clinton is getting a ton of money, including $15 million in just this campaign, including millions of dollars that she put into her own pocket in paid speeches from the big banks. So Krugman's got to step up there. He's her line of defense. No, the big banks are fine. They're fine. They didn't cause the crash. They're totally fine. Oh, that's so sad. Now you're in a position as a so-called progressive to defend the giant banks that clearly caused the crash because your political possible future benefactor, who might give you a job in the administration if you just play it right, is taking all that money from the banks? Okay. Then he goes on to say preposterous things like shadow banks like Lehman Brothers weren't necessarily that big. Okay, now all of a sudden Lehman Brothers is a shadow bank and not a real bank because the banks must be protected. And Lehman Brothers was obviously bad. I mean, it went under, right? No, it's okay. It's just a shadow bank. It's just a shadow bank. And it's not that big. Really? That's not what you were saying in 2009. In that same 2009 article where you wanted to nationalize the banks, you wrote, the collapse of Lehman Brothers almost destroyed the world financial system. Oops. That seems like they were pretty big. Back then, Lehman Brothers is so big it could destroy the entire financial system of the planet. Now, when Hillary Clinton needs to be protected, Lehman wasn't that big anyway. No. It wasn't a big bank. The big banks aren't the problem. That's bad, man. Okay, then he gets personal. He compares Bernie Sanders to George W. Bush. He says, I warn against the mendacity of George W. Bush. He implies that Bernie Sanders is lying in the same way. He doesn't imply it. He keeps saying Bernie Sanders is lying when it's not true. He mentions the Washington Post article, or he has an allusion to it about the fact check on fossil fuel industry. Does Hillary Clinton take money from the fossil fuel industry? Even in their own fact-checking, Washington Post, which is enormously biased against Bernie Sanders, they're the ones who did the 16 negative headlines about him in 16 hours after his big victories. They ran an article, which I talked about earlier on the show, where they said, yeah, she does take $4.5 million from the fossil fuel industry lobbyists and employees. But it's not that big a deal because she takes so much other donor money that this is small by comparison. And those other lobbyists also lobby for Verizon that wants to kill net neutrality. They also lobby for pharma. And so they're corrupt in a lot of different ways. So they're trying to corrupt her on behalf of fossil fuels, drug companies, and big media companies. I don't find that to be an excuse. And in it, they acknowledge she and her super PACs do take $4.5 million from those. So calling that a lie is actually the lie itself, when it is acknowledged that that is a fact. But Krugman doesn't want to see facts. I mean, look at how much he's perverted the facts on policy already. Then he goes on to say that given the large delegate list she has, especially with voters who are support she has from African-American voters, Bernie Sanders should really wrap it up. The implication being, wait, why did you bring African-American voters into this? Oh, you see, Bernie might be racist by not respecting African-American voters. Otherwise, why did you mention them? I mean, what a preposterous thing it would be if I reversed it and said, given that Bernie Sanders is doing better among white voters, maybe Hillary Clinton should be respectful of whites and wrap it up. That sounds miserable, doesn't it? So why is it any better when he does it about African-Americans? Why did you even bring them up? It's to insinuate racism from the most liberal senator in the country and a guy you've criticized as too liberal. You see the dirty politics that they're playing here, and we're not even done yet. The final part is he says, I don't know why he's encouraging this Bernie or bust crowd. That seems to be what he's doing here. Is it to possibly help Donald Trump or Ted Cruz get into the White House? Yeah, the most liberal senator in the country, who you've derided as a Democratic Socialist and others in the mainstream media have as well, would like to put Donald Trump in the White House. That's his real secret motivation. Have you heard anything more preposterous in your life? And then he adds to that, if not, what does he think he's doing? Well, I got a crazy idea. I think he thinks he's running for president. And he thinks that his opponent in the primaries is Hillary Clinton. So he is conducting a campaign against her. Oh my God. See, but that's what they're offended by. Bernie, why haven't you bowed your head yet? Why don't you know your role? Your role was to be, loyal opposition. And then Hillary will go a little to the left in the primary, and then she'll go back to the right in the general election. Bernie, why won't you know your role? You're making us smear you in horrible and malicious ways. So now we're going to say maybe racist, maybe sexist, maybe a supporter of Donald Trump and doesn't know what he's talking about. A fool that doesn't know policy. A fool that doesn't know policy. Maybe a guy who thinks the big banks had nothing to do with the crash in 2008. That might be an apt description for. Paul, good luck with getting that job in the Clinton administration.